They told me I had 48 hours, just 48 hours to gather everything I owned, to put my memories into cardboard boxes, and to get out. My parents sat across the table that night, their voices steady, their expressions carved from stone. "Eleanor, your sister owns this house now. You need to leave. 2 days should be more than enough." Those words didn't just strip me of a roof over my head. They stripped me of a lifetime, of every effort I had poured into this family. And in that moment, I knew I had to tell this story, because silence would only bury me deeper in the shadows they had always kept me in. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home, you'll understand why I cannot stay quiet anymore. My name is Eleanor, and I am 42 years old. I was raised in a home where love was rationed, where fairness was a myth whispered about, but never practiced. I speak today not because I crave sympathy, but because the truth demands a voice. For years, my pain was dismissed as exaggeration, my sacrifices treated as obligations, and my existence reduced to what was convenient for everyone else. But when my own parents decided to erase me completely, gifting everything I had helped preserve to the sister they always adored, I realized silence was complicity. I tell this story so that no one mistakes kindness for weakness ever again. That night around the dinner table still replays in my mind like a film I can't pause. The clink of silverware against porcelain, the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, the smell of roast chicken, heavy with rosemary, filling the air like a cruel joke, as if a home-cooked meal could soften the blow of betrayal. My father cleared his throat the way he always did before announcing something important. I leaned in, thinking perhaps he would finally acknowledge me, finally see me. But instead, his words struck like ice water poured straight into my veins. "Your sister Emily has inherited this place. The deed is in her name. You'll need to move out immediately." My mother didn't even look at me. She simply nodded in agreement, as though expelling me from my own life was nothing more than settling a utility bill. I wanted to protest, to remind them of every hour I had spent repainting these walls, of the weekends I gave up to repair the roof when storms tore it apart, of the money I lent them when foreclosure notices arrived in the mail. But their faces told me it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, I had always been temporary. Emily was permanence. Emily was the chosen one. And I was just a placeholder, tolerated until they could return everything to its rightful owner. The golden child who never lifted a finger, but always received the crown. If you've ever been the forgotten one, the one whose achievements vanish into silence while another's smallest efforts earn applause, you'll know the sting that never fades. As a child, I thought maybe if I studied harder, smiled more, stayed quieter, they would see me. I won spelling bees with no one in the audience. I brought home perfect report cards, only to be told, "Don't brag, you'll make Emily feel bad." When she scored average grades, the entire family went out for ice cream. I remember standing at the kitchen window one summer night, watching them drive away without me, the taillights glowing red like a wound in the dark. That was my childhood, watching from behind glass, always outside the circle of warmth. And still, despite the neglect, I stayed. I cooked meals. I took on extra shifts to pay medical bills when my father's back gave out. I learned how to mend leaking pipes and faulty wiring so we wouldn't have to call expensive contractors. This house survived because of me. Yet the night they handed it over to Emily as though I had never existed, I finally understood. In this family, devotion was currency that never earned interest. I had invested decades, and my account remained empty. The hardest part wasn't the command to leave. It was the casual cruelty in their tone. My mother sipped her wine and said, "It's for the best, Eleanor. You'll find somewhere smaller, something more suited to you." More suited to me, as though I were an old piece of furniture too shabby for display. My father added, "Your sister has plans for the place. A family deserves space, after all." Their words carried an unspoken judgment. I was not family, not really. Not in the way Emily was. When you grow up invisible, you learn to hold your breath through storms, to endure. But this eviction from my own life was different. This was not just about losing a roof. It was about losing the last illusion that I ever mattered to them. And that, I realized, was why I had to tell this story. Not to beg for sympathy, but to expose the cost of silence, to show that even the most patient heart can fracture beyond repair. That night, I walked back to my room slowly, my footsteps heavy against the creaking wooden floorboards I once repaired with my own hands. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faded wallpaper I had chosen years ago, the one with pale blue patterns Emily used to mock. Everything around me carried the imprint of my effort, yet none of it belonged to me anymore. I opened the nightstand drawer, pulled out an old photograph. Me at 16, holding a trophy for a statewide science fair. My parents weren't there that day either. Emily had a dance recital, and they said I'd understand. Looking at that photo, I saw the same quiet desperation in my teenage smile that I still carried now. The desperate hope that one day I would be seen. That hope had died at the dinner table tonight. I know some of you will ask why I didn't fight back, why I didn't slam my fist against the table, shout until my voice cracked. The truth is, I didn't need to. Their decision had already revealed everything. You can scream into deaf ears forever, or you can choose silence that speaks louder than any words. I chose silence that night. But silence doesn't mean defeat. It means preparation. It means gathering strength for the moment when truth will no longer be denied. So here I am, telling this story. My name is Eleanor, and I was given 48 hours to erase myself from the only home I ever knew. But this time, I am not stepping quietly into the shadows. This time, I am opening every door they tried to lock behind me, because the truth once spoken cannot be evicted. When I look back now, the command to leave was only the final blow in a lifetime of smaller wounds that had already hollowed me out. The truth is, by the time my parents gave Emily the house, the foundation had been laid long before. Years of quiet betrayals, of celebrations I was never part of victories that turned into silence because they belonged to me and not to her. If you want to understand how a person becomes invisible inside their own family, you have to see the small moments. They are sharper than knives because they look so ordinary. I still remember the year I turned 10. I had been practicing for weeks to play a piano piece at the school talent show. I begged them to come. I even left notes on the refrigerator door. That night, I walked onto the stage, scanning the rows of parents and siblings, my heart pounding with hope. There was no one there for me. The next week, Emily had a 15-minute recital of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and every relative, even cousins from out of state, packed the auditorium. They clapped as if she had played at Carnegie Hall. I sat in the back, pretending to be proud, while something inside me cracked. That was the pattern. When I got an A, the response was, "Of course, Eleanor. That's just what we expect." When Emily scraped by with a B-, they took her out for pizza and made a toast to her hard work. My science fair project once won first prize statewide. I built a model of renewable energy using wind turbines from spare parts. My father barely glanced at it, saying, "Don't clutter the garage with junk." Months later, Emily painted a crooked birdhouse in art class, and he hung it proudly in the backyard, telling neighbors how talented she was. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about being pushed away, treated as disposable. I cannot count the number of times I was sent to Grandma's house just because I sneezed or coughed. My mother's excuse was always the same: "We can't risk Emily catching anything." I would spend nights away, clutching borrowed pajamas, wondering why my presence was considered a danger, while hers was always a treasure. At 12, I began to realize the truth. I was not their priority. I was their afterthought. The meals told their own story. Emily's favorite dishes appeared like clockwork: mac and cheese baked with breadcrumbs, chocolate cake with extra frosting. My preferences didn't exist. On my birthday, my cake always came in her flavor. When I protested once, my father snapped, "Don't be selfish. It's just cake." But it was never just cake. It was proof that even on the one day meant for me, I was nothing more than a shadow orbiting around her. By the time I reached high school, the imbalance was unbearable. I studied late into the night, earning top marks, while working part-time at a diner to save money for college. Every paycheck I earned felt like my own secret rebellion, proof that I could build a life outside their narrow circle. Meanwhile, Emily was handed allowances, new clothes, even a car for her 16th birthday. When I asked for help with textbooks, my mother said, "We can't do everything, Eleanor. You're independent. You'll figure it out." And I did. But the independence was not a choice. It was survival. I remember one winter when the roof leaked after a heavy storm. Water poured into the living room, soaking the carpet. My parents panicked, talking about how expensive repairs would be. I was 16, and without being asked, I climbed up onto the icy shingles with buckets of tar and tools borrowed from a neighbor. I spent hours patching holes in the freezing cold. By the time I came down, my hands were raw and bleeding. My mother handed Emily a blanket and hot cocoa while I sat shivering by myself. No one thanked me. The only words I heard were, "Be careful not to make a mess with your muddy boots." Those years built a kind of silence inside me. I learned to swallow the sting, to breathe through the injustice. But silence has a weight. It grows heavier every time your achievement is dismissed, every time your sacrifice is unnoticed, every time your presence is treated as expendable. And that weight does not disappear. It waits for the moment when the final betrayal tips the balance. Looking back, I see how every small slight was a rehearsal for the eviction. When they told me I had 2 days to leave, it wasn't shocking because of its cruelty. It was shocking because it confirmed what I had always known. In their eyes, I was never really part of the family. I was useful when bills needed to be paid, when repairs had to be made, when someone needed to step aside so Emily could shine. But when permanence was on the line, when the deed to the house became the prize, I was cast aside with the same ease as a plate scraped clean after dinner. The truth is, the injustice wasn't sudden. It was layered into years of neglect, baked into every choice they made, stitched into the fabric of our lives. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to believe love was possible, that maybe if I worked harder, endured longer, they would see me. But by the time the house was handed over to Emily, I finally understood. You cannot force recognition from those who are committed to denying your worth. This is why I speak now, because being erased does not make me invisible, because silence may have defined my past, but it will not define my voice anymore. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been told your needs don't matter, if you've ever been replaced in your own story, you'll understand. The house may be theirs on paper, but the truth of what I lived, every sacrifice, every humiliation, will never belong to them. It belongs to me. And this story, like my life, has only just begun. The storm that had been gathering for years finally broke the night Emily claimed what was never hers to begin with. The betrayal didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in, disguised as a family dinner, the kind of evening where everyone pretends the air isn't thick with resentment. But then came the moment that stripped away every illusion. My parents didn't just ask me to leave. They revealed the plan that had been unfolding behind closed doors, a plan that turned me from daughter to stranger in an instant. It was a Friday evening, one of those damp nights in late spring when the smell of rain still lingers in the air. My parents asked me to join them in the dining room. The table was already set with Emily's favorite meal, lasagna with extra cheese. I noticed there wasn't even a plate for me. My place at the table had been erased before the conversation even began. My father folded his hands, looking at me the way a landlord looks at a tenant who has overstayed their welcome. My mother's gaze was colder, her lips pressed into a line that spoke of decisions already made. "Eleanor," my father said, "we need to talk about the future of this house." His voice carried that patronizing tone I knew too well, the one he used whenever he was about to cut me down but wanted to sound reasonable. Emily sat beside him, her arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at her mouth, as though she had already won. I braced myself, but nothing prepared me for the words that followed. "This house," he continued, "has always been meant for family stability. Emily will be starting her own family soon. It's only right that she has a proper home. We've transferred the deed into her name, effective immediately." My ears rang. For a moment, the room spun as though the floor itself had shifted beneath me. I stared at him, at both of them, searching for some flicker of compassion. But all I found was calculation. Emily leaned back in her chair, her voice syrupy and cruel. "Don't worry, Eleanor. You're independent. You'll figure things out like you always do." Her words, disguised as encouragement, carried the same poison I had swallowed since childhood. I reminded them of everything I had done. The nights I worked double shifts at the diner to cover the mortgage when my father's hours were cut. The repairs I handled on my own when contractors quoted prices we couldn't afford. The sacrifices I made so this house could stand. My mother's response was a shrug. That was your choice. Nobody forced you. Nobody forced me. That single phrase was enough to turn every memory into a blade. I had bled for this family, carried burdens no teenager should carry, and they dismissed it as voluntary labor. Emily twirled her fork in her pasta and said, "It's just a house, Eleanor. You don't need to be so dramatic." But it wasn't just a house. It was years of my life, every ounce of energy poured into something I believed we all shared. It was proof of my belonging, the only tangible reward for decades of silent endurance. And now it was gone, handed to the one who had never lifted a finger, the one whose greatest accomplishment was being born the favored child. I wanted to scream, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I excused myself, my voice steady, almost calm. I walked to my room, the same room where I had spent countless nights studying under dim light, where I had cried into my pillow when the unfairness became too heavy to bear. I closed the door and pressed my back against it, breathing slowly, letting the weight of betrayal sink in. This was no longer about favoritism. This was theft, orchestrated by the very people who were supposed to protect me. Over the next 24 hours, the reality unfolded in sharper detail. Mail arrived addressed to Emily, confirming the transfer. Bank documents bore my parents' signatures, all completed weeks earlier without my knowledge. They hadn't even given me the courtesy of warning. Every piece of paper was proof that their plan had been deliberate, methodical, cruel. Neighbors began to whisper. Word spread quickly in our small town. One even stopped me at the grocery store and said, "Congratulations to your sister. I hear she finally owns the house." I forced a smile, but inside, I was burning. Everyone knew before I did. I wasn't just erased from my family. I was erased from my community. The betrayal was complete when Emily came into my room uninvited. She stood in the doorway, surveying the space as if it already belonged to her. "You should probably start packing," she said casually, "because I have plans for this room. Maybe a nursery." She smiled, placing a hand on her stomach, as though announcing a pregnancy. But there was no child, only the promise of one more reason for my parents to worship her. That was the moment the air turned poisonous. The girl who once stole my birthday cakes and claimed my achievements as her own now stood in front of me, prepared to erase me entirely from the only home I had ever known. And my parents applauded her for it. I sat down on the bed, forcing myself to remain composed. I realized that what they had done was not just betrayal. It was a declaration. I was expendable. I had never been their daughter in the way Emily was. I had been the scaffolding, necessary while the building was under construction, but destined to be torn down once the favored structure stood tall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house in silence, touching the walls I had painted, the banister I had sanded smooth, the tiles I had laid with my own hands. Each surface whispered back the same truth. All of this was mine in effort, but never in ownership. I returned to my room as dawn broke, watching the first light creep across the faded wallpaper. And in that light, I saw not just loss, but clarity. They had taken the house. They had taken every recognition I ever deserved. But what they could not take was the truth. And the truth was this. I had carried this family. I had been the reason the house still stood, but the reason debts were paid. The reason they had stability to even think about passing it on. They had betrayed me, yes, but in doing so, they revealed who they truly were. The eviction was no longer just about leaving. It was about exposing the lie of our family. And as much as it tore at me, I knew this was the beginning of something they could not control. The days that followed blurred together, yet every detail etched itself into my memory like a scar. I walked through the house quietly, gathering my belongings into boxes, while my parents and Emily carried on as though nothing unusual was happening. They spoke of paint colors and new furniture, discussing renovations for rooms I had poured my life into. Their voices drifted through the hallways, echoing like a cruel reminder that I had been replaced before I had even left. But silence has its own power, and mine was about to break. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, when relatives gathered for what my mother called a casual lunch. I knew better. It was staged. She wanted me gone in front of witnesses, perhaps to prevent an outburst or to make my exile appear reasonable. The dining room buzzed with conversation as cousins and uncles filled their plates. Emily floated around in a pastel dress, glowing with triumph. I sat at the far end, my boxes stacked neatly in the entryway, evidence of the life they had shoved aside. My father raised his glass, clearing his throat. "We're proud to announce that Emily is now the rightful owner of this home," he said, his voice steady with pride. Applause rippled around the table. Some guests clapped politely, others exchanged uneasy glances. My chest tightened, but I stayed still, watching, waiting. Then Emily leaned forward, her smile wide and deliberate. "Eleanor will be moving out soon. She's always been so independent, and this house deserves a family ready to build a future." Her words landed like a slap, each syllable coated in arrogance. That was when I chose not to remain silent. I placed my fork down gently, the sound sharp against the plate. All eyes turned to me. My voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of steel. "If we're discussing ownership, perhaps we should mention how this house was saved more than once. Not by Emily, but by me." My mother scoffed, waving her hand as if brushing away a speck of dust. "Eleanor, this isn't the time." But it was. It was the only time. I reached into my bag and laid a small stack of papers on the table. Receipts, bank statements, repair invoices, all in my name. Gasps rippled through the room as I spoke. When foreclosure notices came, I worked double shifts and paid the balance. When the roof caved in, I stood in the cold repairing it. When debts piled high, I took out loans under my name to keep this place standing. Every corner of this house bears my work, my sacrifice. My father's face darkened. Those were family responsibilities. You did what anyone would. I met his gaze, unflinching. No, I did what no one else would. Emily wasn't there patching the roof at midnight. Emily wasn't handing over paychecks while studying for exams. Emily wasn't sacrificing her own future to keep this house alive. I was. The room fell into a heavy silence. A cousin shifted uncomfortably in her seat, whispering to another. My uncle cleared his throat, muttering, "I didn't know any of this." That was the crack I needed. I looked at Emily, her face pale now, her composure slipping. "You walk around claiming this place is yours, but the truth is, you are inheriting something you never built. You are living in walls held together by my effort, not yours." My mother tried to intervene, her voice sharp. "Eleanor, stop embarrassing us." I turned to her, my voice low but steady. "Embarrassment isn't mine to carry. It belongs to those who erase the truth." For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch when her eyes hardened. Emily attempted a laugh, brittle and thin. "So what, you want applause for being responsible? That doesn't change the fact that the house is mine now." I leaned back slightly, the calm returning to my tone. "It changes everything, because while papers can transfer ownership, they cannot transfer sacrifice. You may hold the deed, Emily, but you will never own the truth of how this house stands, and everyone here knows it now." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. My relatives avoided eye contact with my parents, some shaking their heads. One aunt muttered, "This isn't right." The applause that had greeted Emily's announcement dissolved into a thick unease. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their pride unraveling in front of the very people they had hoped to impress. For years, I had swallowed injustice, thinking endurance was my only option. But that day, in front of every witness they had summoned to legitimize my erasure, I turned their stage against them. They wanted a display of Emily's triumph. Instead, they watched the truth they had buried rise to the surface, undeniable and sharp. When the lunch ended, relatives left quickly, murmuring goodbyes tinged with awkwardness. Some touched my shoulder gently, offering silent solidarity. Emily stormed upstairs, slamming her new bedroom door as if to reclaim territory. My parents lingered, but their eyes refused to meet mine. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, the stack of papers still on the table. The air was thick with the weight of what had been revealed. I wasn't naive. I knew their decision wouldn't change. The deed remained in Emily's name, but something deeper had shifted. The silence that had smothered me for decades was gone, replaced by a voice that refused to be buried again. As dawn crept through the windows, I realized the truth was no longer mine alone. It had been spoken, witnessed, and etched into the memory of everyone who heard it. My parents could ignore me, Emily could sneer, but they could no longer rewrite the story. I had faced them, and I had not faltered. And in that moment, I understood something vital. They might strip me of walls and ceilings, but they could never strip me of dignity. And dignity, once claimed, is a foundation no one can demolish. The aftermath of that Sunday lunch clung to the house like smoke after a fire. My parents walked more quietly, their usual authority muted by the whispers that had followed them out the door. Emily, however, grew restless. Her victory had been tainted. The applause she expected never came, and the pride she wanted from others had been replaced with disapproval. I could see it in her eyes every time she passed me in the hallway, her smile tighter, her words sharper. She had the deed, but she no longer had the illusion of innocence. It didn't take long for the consequences to start unfolding. A week later, a letter arrived addressed to me. It was from the bank, a reminder of a loan still active in my name, one of the loans I had taken years ago to keep the house from foreclosure. The payments were current because I had sacrificed to keep them that way, but the bank wanted confirmation on future installments. Emily picked up the envelope from the kitchen counter, frowning. "Why are they still sending you this?" she demanded. I took the letter gently from her hands. "Because when this house was at risk, I stepped in. That debt belongs to me, and so does the history that comes with it." Her face flushed. "That's not my problem. The house is mine now." I met her eyes calmly. "You're right. The house may be in your name, but the strings attached to it, they are still tied to me. Without me, it would have been gone years ago. Remember that every time you walk through these halls." She stormed off, but the truth had settled between us like a shadow she couldn't shake. My parents tried to regain control, calling me aside one evening. "Eleanor," my mother said, her tone measured, "we need peace in this house. Stop making things difficult." I almost laughed at the irony. "Peace?" I asked softly. "You handed me an eviction notice, stripped me of everything I built, and you want peace?" My father tried to sound stern. "You embarrassed us in front of family. People are talking." His words were meant to shame me, but instead, they revealed the weakness of their position. Their concern wasn't about justice. It was about appearances. And appearances were slipping fast. Relatives who once blindly praised Emily now kept their distance. One aunt who had clapped politely at the lunch stopped by quietly with groceries, setting them on my counter and whispering, "I don't know how you did it all those years, Eleanor. You deserve better." A neighbor mentioned they had heard the story too, shaking their head in disbelief. "Your parents shouldn't have treated you that way." Every whispered word was another crack in the image my parents had spent years protecting. Emily tried to restore her shine by announcing grand plans for renovations. She spoke of tearing down walls, of making the living room open concept, of transforming my old room into something new. Contractors came, walking through the house with tape measures and notebooks, but every estimate they gave was staggering. Without my free labor, without my willingness to sacrifice paychecks and sweat, the costs were unbearable. I overheard my father muttering about the price. Emily's confidence faltered. The house she had claimed so easily was turning into a burden she couldn't manage. One evening, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread around her, contractor quotes, maintenance costs, even tax documents she hadn't considered before. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She looked up at me, her voice breaking through her pride. "This isn't fair. I didn't know it would be like this." For a moment, I almost pitied her. But then I remembered the smirk on her face when she told me to pack my things. I remembered her rehearsed words in front of the family, dismissing me as if I were nothing. My pity dissolved into clarity. "Life has never been fair, Emily," I said quietly. "But the difference is, I learned how to survive it. You've never had to." The cracks widened further when the utilities arrived under my name. Years ago, I had been the one responsible for setting up accounts, managing payments, keeping the lights on. The bills still came addressed to me, and the companies required authorization to switch them. Emily fumed when she realized her ownership of the deed wasn't enough to grant her control. "Why is everything connected to you?" she shouted. My answer was simple. "Because while you were being celebrated, I was holding everything together. You can erase me from the paper, but not from the structure. This house may bear your name, but it still carries my imprint." My parents avoided me more and more, their shame visible in every glance. My mother busied herself with trivial tasks, her silence louder than any lecture. My father retreated to the garage, tinkering with tools, but never looking me in the eye. For once, the weight of truth hung heavier on them than it did on me. The turning point came when another relative confronted them publicly. At a church gathering, my uncle stood up during a casual conversation and said, "I don't understand how you could give everything to Emily after Eleanor sacrificed so much. We all saw the proof." My parents froze, eyes turned toward them, waiting for a defense they couldn't provide. My mother's face flushed crimson. My father stammered something about family decisions, but the damage was done. The humiliation they had feared most had arrived, and it spread faster than they could contain. Emily withdrew, her once bright presence dimming under the pressure. She still had the house, but it no longer felt like triumph. It was heavy, costly, and tainted. Every corner reminded her of my sacrifices. Every whisper from relatives reminded her of the truth. What was meant to elevate her had become a constant reminder of her dependence, her undeserved privilege. And I, the one they thought they could erase, stood taller than ever. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged. I had simply revealed the truth, and the truth had done the rest. For the first time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. They had tried to strip me of everything, but all they managed to do was reveal their own emptiness. Justice, I realized, doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of consequences no one can escape. My parents and Emily were facing those consequences now, trapped in the very web they had spun. And I was free at last. Not because they had released me, but because I had released myself. The silence in the house grew heavier with each passing day. Not because I had nothing left to say, but because the truth had already been spoken, and it was echoing louder than any argument could. Emily drifted through the rooms with her head lowered, weighed down by responsibilities she had never prepared for. My parents avoided me, their pride fractured, their authority reduced to whispers behind closed doors. For once, I wasn't the one carrying the burden of shame. They were, and I could finally breathe. Packing the last of my boxes felt different now. It wasn't an act of exile. It was a choice. Each folded sweater, each carefully wrapped mug, each photo I tucked away carried its own story of sacrifice. Yet for the first time, I wasn't leaving with bitterness. I was leaving with clarity. The house that had once felt like the center of my existence had turned into a monument of betrayal. But betrayal, I realized, does not have the power to define me unless I let it. On my final night, I stood in the living room with the lights off, letting the moonlight spill through the windows. My hands traced the banister I had sanded as a teenager, the tiles I had laid when money was tight, the paint on the walls I had chosen carefully to make a place feel like home. These walls remembered me, even if my family didn't. And that was enough. As I walked out with the last box, I found Emily waiting near the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Maybe she wanted to apologize. Maybe she wanted to justify herself again. But in the end, silence stretched between us. For the first time, she seemed to understand that ownership on paper is not the same as ownership of respect. She had the deed, but I had the dignity. And dignity does not crumble. I placed my keys on the counter without a word and closed the door behind me. The air outside was cool, fresh, almost cleansing. I realized then that the house had never truly been my home. My home was within me, in the strength that carried me through years of neglect, in the voice I had finally allowed to be heard, in the freedom of walking away with my head held high. In the weeks that followed, I started building a life that belonged to me alone. I rented a small apartment, nothing fancy, but every corner felt alive because it was mine, untouched by favoritism or manipulation. I cooked meals in my own kitchen, chose colors for my own walls, planted herbs on the windowsill that grew under my care. For once, every effort I made was rewarded, not erased. The gossip in town continued to swirl, but this time, it wasn't about me being invisible. It was about the cruelty my parents had displayed, about Emily's unearned privilege crumbling under pressure. People who once looked past me now looked me in the eye with respect. Not pity, respect. And that was all I had ever wanted. The greatest lesson I carried away was this: sometimes the family you are born into cannot see your worth, no matter how brightly you shine, but their blindness does not define you. What defines you is how you carry yourself when the world tries to strip you bare. I had been erased from their narrative, yet I emerged with a story stronger than theirs could ever be. If you've listened this far, maybe you felt invisible too. Maybe you've been the one overlooked, the one asked to sacrifice without thanks, the one replaced in your own story. Hear me clearly. Your worth is not determined by those who fail to see it. It is determined by your resilience, your choices, and your ability to walk away when staying would mean losing yourself. I don't share this for sympathy. I share it because stories like mine happen in quiet corners of so many homes, and too often, the voices remain silent. Silence only serves those who benefit from it. Speaking out, whether through action, through truth, or through simply walking away, is where freedom begins. My parents still live in that house. Emily still carries the title of owner. But when people drive past, they no longer see triumph. They see the hollow cost of favoritism, the cracks of injustice, the truth that has already been spoken. And when they see me, they see a woman who chose dignity over despair. That, to me, is worth more than any deed. As I stand on the threshold of a life that finally belongs to me, I carry no hatred, only understanding. Some families will never give you what you deserve, but life has a way of teaching justice, even if it comes late. And justice, once it arrives, leaves no doubt. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever carried the weight of being unseen, know this: you are not alone. And if you want to hear more stories that reveal the hidden truths families try to bury, stay with me. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes the most powerful justice isn't revenge, it's the strength to walk away and never look back. My mom yelled, "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out. That house is your sister's now." I didn't argue. Yeet this, I just stayed silent and prepared. 2 days later, when my sister walked in, she wished she had never stepped inside.